The vibrant chime of my phone echoed through the bedroom, jarring me from a restless slumber. I glanced at the clock, 3:14 a.m. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut as I reached for the device. Work emergencies at this hour were rare, but not unheard of in my line of business. My fingers froze as I caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't a work notification, it was a message from an unknown number. Curiosity piqued. I swiped to unlock the phone, and my world shattered. "Can't wait to see you again, babe. That quickie in the supply closet was insane." The message was undoubtedly not meant for me, but the sender's identity was all too clear. Marissa, my cousin and supposed confidant, who had been staying with Derek and me to help during his recovery. Bile rose in my throat as I scrolled through the thread, each message more explicit than the last. The betrayal cut deeper with every lewd word, every suggestive emoji. Derek's affair with Marissa was laid bare before my eyes, the evidence irrefutable. I turned to face Derek's sleeping form, my vision blurred by unshed tears. How could he? How could they? Marissa was family, someone I had trusted implicitly. Yet there they were, carrying on a sordid affair right under my nose. Anger and hurt swirled within me, a tempestuous storm of emotions threatening to break loose. I longed to scream, to hurl accusations and demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. Instead, I slipped out of bed, my movements robotic, and made my way to the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching Derek's phone like a lifeline, its damning contents a stark reminder of the life I thought I knew crumbling around me. Hours ticked by, the first rays of dawn peeking through the curtains. I heard footsteps behind me, the telltale creak of the floorboards announcing Derek's presence. "Elena, what are you doing up so early?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I pivoted to face him, my jaw clenched, and held up the phone, the incriminating messages splayed across the screen. "Care to explain this?" Derek's expression morphed from confusion to panic in an instant. I can explain," he stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Explain what exactly?" I snapped, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How you've been sleeping with my cousin right under my nose, how you've been betraying me with someone I trusted." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off, unwilling to hear his excuses. "Save it, Derek. I don't want to hear your lies anymore." Anger and anguish welled up within me, threatening to spill over. I fought to maintain my composure, to cling to the last shreds of dignity I had left. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes hardening. "If you hadn't been so wrapped up in your work all the time, maybe this wouldn't have happened." His words sliced through me like a knife, twisting the blade of betrayal deeper into my heart. In that moment, I knew our marriage was well and truly over. I rose from the couch, squaring my shoulders and meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Get out." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a shake of my head. "Just go, Derek. We're done." As he stormed out of the apartment, the weight of his betrayal finally hit me, and I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. But amidst the pain and heartbreak, a newfound determination took root within me. They would pay for this. Both of them. In the days following Derek's explosive revelation, a fog of grief and disbelief enveloped me. I alternated between fits of rage and deep sorrow, grappling with the harsh reality of his betrayal. But as the initial shock subsided, a steely resolve took root. I would not be a victim, not anymore. I confided in Alex, my closest friend and a brilliant lawyer. His jaw tightened as I recounted the sordid details, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by a cold fury. "That lying, deceitful bastard," he seethed, slamming his fist on the table. "We're going to bury him, Elena. I promise you that." With Alex's guidance, I began meticulously gathering evidence of Derek's misdeeds, leaving no stone unturned. Late nights were spent combing through financial records, unearthing a trail of embezzlement and fraud that seemed to stretch back years. Derek had the audacity to confront me one evening as I pored over the damning documents. "What are you up to, Elena?" he demanded, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing, though I think I already know the answer." He scoffed, his lips curling into a contemptuous sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Newsflash, sweetheart, you're just a pretty face. Without me, your precious company would be nothing." White-hot rage coursed through my veins, but I reined it in, forcing a tight smile. We'll see about that, won't we? As the weeks passed, the web of deceit surrounding Derek and Marissa grew increasingly tangled. Marissa had not only been complicit in the affair, but had actively aided Derek in siphoning funds from my company. I summoned her to my office, the weight of the evidence heavy in my hands. She sauntered in, her expression a sickening mix of arrogance and feigned innocence. "Elena, darling, what's this all about?" she simpered, batting her eyelashes. I slapped the stack of papers onto the desk, my teeth clenched. "Cut the act, Marissa. I know everything. The affair, the embezzlement. You two make me sick." Her facade crumbled, replaced by a sneer that twisted her once familiar features into an ugly mask. "Oh, please, like you're some paragon of virtue. You were never around, always too busy with your precious company to pay attention to Derek. He needed someone who could actually satisfy him in more ways than one." The venom in her words stung, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "You're both going to pay for what you've done," I vowed, my voice low and dangerous. Marissa threw back her head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Face it, Elena, you're powerless. Derek and I hold all the cards." I leaned forward, my gaze boring into hers with icy determination. "We'll see about that." As she swept out of the office, I allowed myself a grim smile. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. With Alex's help, I would dismantle their lives piece by piece, until they had nothing left but the consequences of their actions. The war had only just begun. In the wake of Marissa's taunting diatribe, a cold clarity washed over me. If I wanted to emerge victorious from this battle, I needed to arm myself to the teeth. Blind rage and impulsive actions would only play into Derek and Marissa's hands. No, I needed to be strategic, calculating, to fight fire with an inferno of my own making. I summoned Alex to my office, my expression grim. "It's time we took the gloves off," I stated, sliding the damning evidence across the desk towards him. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the documents, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Son of a bitch has been bleeding your company dry for years," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Exactly, which is why we need to hit him where it hurts. His bank account." I leaned forward, my gaze steely. "I want you to freeze every asset, revoke all access to funds, the whole 9 yards. Derek thinks money is power? Let's see how powerful he feels when he's broke and exposed as the fraud he is." A feral grin spread across Alex's face. "Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork filed first thing tomorrow morning." As Alex left to set the wheels in motion, I turned my attention to another crucial front, protecting my own assets. Derek and Marissa may have thought they held all the cards, but I wasn't about to make it easy for them. I summoned my finance team, my expression grave. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation on our hands." Over the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to transfer funds, liquidate investments, and batten down every financial hatch. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my assets were secured, safely out of Derek and Marissa's grubby paws. The first salvo had been fired. A few days later, Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "It's done. Derek's assets have been frozen, and the authorities are investigating his financial dealings." Relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Derek would undoubtedly retaliate, and I had to be prepared. Sure enough, my phone rang later that evening, Derek's name flashing across the screen. I answered with a smirk. "Hello, dear husband." His voice was a low snarl, barely contained fury simmering beneath the surface. "What the hell did you do, Elena? My accounts are locked, my cards declined, everything's frozen." "Oh, I'm sorry, did I fail to mention?" I feigned innocence, unable to resist twisting the knife. "I'm taking what's mine, Derek. Every last penny you stole from me, from my company, you and your little mistress are going to pay for what you've done." There was a beat of silence, and then he erupted, a torrent of vile profanities spewing forth. "You conniving bitch! You think you've won, but you're dead wrong. This isn't over, not by a long shot." The line went dead, but his words only fueled my resolve. Let him rant and rave. I was holding all the cards now. With my assets secure and the law on my side, Derek and Marissa were nothing more than trapped rats, their world crumbling around them. I poured myself a glass of wine, allowing a self-satisfied smile to tug at my lips. The battle was far from over, but the tides had well and truly turned in my favor. They had started this war. but I was going to finish it and emerge victorious, no matter what it took. With Derek's assets frozen and the authorities sniffing around his financial dealings, it was time to unleash the next phase of my counterattack. I knew Derek wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was prepared for all-out war. I strode into Alex's office, my jaw set with grim determination. It's time we brought out the big guns. Alex looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. You know I live for dramatic flair, but I'm going to need a bit more context here. I want to file for divorce and hit Derek with every legal claim in the book. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, the whole 9 yards. My voice was steely, brooking no argument. A feral grin spread across Alex's face. Now you're speaking my language. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. True to his word, Alex had the divorce papers ready within days, complete with a laundry list of charges that would make any self-respecting criminal's head spin. I signed them with a flourish, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. Derek's going to fight this tooth and nail, you know that, right? Alex cautioned, his expression serious. I met his gaze levelly. I'm counting on it. The moment the papers were filed, all hell broke loose. Derek's lawyer, a smarmy little weasel of a man, descended upon me like a rabid dog, hurling threats and accusations. This is a gross overreaction, Mrs. Davis, he sneered, his beady eyes narrowed with disdain. My client may have made some indiscretions, but this legal onslaught is completely unwarranted. I arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. Indiscretions? Is that what you call defrauding a company and cheating on your wife with her own cousin? The weasel's face reddened, but I pressed on, relentless. Your client is a lying, thieving scumbag, and he's going to pay for what he's done, in full. As the legal battle raged on, Derek and Marissa's sordid affair became public knowledge, splashed across every tabloid and gossip rag. Suddenly, the perfect couple everyone had envied was a punchline, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Derek tried to maintain his usual bravado, sneering at reporters and issuing terse, no comments, but I could see the cracks in his facade, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Marissa, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention, preening and posing for the cameras like a deranged socialite. That is, until the backlash from her own family hit. Her parents disowned her, her siblings cut off all contact. Even her friends abandoned her, appalled by her despicable actions. As for me, I weathered the storm with my head held high, refusing to be cowed or shamed. Derek and Marissa had made their bed, and now they could lie in it, squirming under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. The courtroom battles were brutal, with both sides flinging allegations and personal attacks like grenades. But thanks to Alex's legal prowess and the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, we emerged victorious time and again. Finally, after months of bitter legal warfare, the knockout blow was delivered. Derek was not only forced to relinquish control of my company, but found himself facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. As the judge read out the verdict, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Derek caught my gaze, his eyes burning with impotent rage and hatred. But I didn't care. He was finished. His life in ruins. The war was over, and I had won. With Derek's assets frozen and the legal noose tightening around his neck, I expected him to slink away into the shadows, tail tucked between his legs. But the man was nothing if not a glutton for punishment. I'd barely savored my courtroom victory when my phone rang, Derek's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered, bracing myself for the inevitable torrent of vitriol. You think you've won, don't you? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Well, you're sadly mistaken. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I rolled my eyes, utterly unfazed by his empty bravado. Save your breath, Derek. The courts have ruled, and you've been exposed as the lying, thieving scumbag you are. It's over. There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his devious little mind. Maybe for me, he conceded, his tone taking on a sinister edge. But what about your precious company? You really think you're going to be able to run that ship without me? A knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach, but I refused to show any outward signs of concern. I've been running this company just fine for years, Derek. You were nothing but a leech, draining its resources for your own gain. He barked out a harsh laugh. Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart. But the truth is you're in way over your head without me. Just you wait. Your precious empire is going to come crashing down around you." The line went dead, but his words continued to echo in my mind, stoking the flames of doubt and uncertainty. Could he be right? Had I underestimated just how much control he'd wielded over the company's inner workings? I pushed the thoughts aside, refocusing my energy on securing my position and safeguarding the company from any further sabotage. With Derek's influence excised like a cancer, I set about purging his loyalists from key positions, replacing them with trusted allies. It wasn't long before the first bombshell hit. An anonymous whistleblower came forward, alleging that Derek had been cooking the books and falsifying financial reports for years. The news sent shockwaves through the company, triggering a mass exodus of investors and clients fleeing the perceived instability. I called an emergency meeting with my executive team, my expression grim. "All right, people, we have a crisis on our hands. Derek's left us a lovely parting gift in the form of cooked books and shady dealings." Panic flickered across their faces, but I silenced it with a raised hand. "But that ends today. From this moment on, we're going to scrub this company clean, leave no stone unturned. We're going to root out every last trace of Derek's corruption and rebuild from the ground up." There were murmurs of assent, but one voice piped up from the back of the room. "With all due respect, ma'am, how can we be sure you're not just as compromised as Derek was?" The accusation hung in the air like a lead balloon, but I met it head-on, unflinching. Because I'm not the one who betrayed this company for personal gain. I'm not the one who cheated and lied and stole. Derek did this, not me. I swept my gaze across the room, my expression resolute. "I know I've got my work cut out for me in terms of regaining your trust, but I'm going to prove to each and every one of you that this company is in good hands, my hands." It was an uphill battle, but slowly, surely, I began to turn the tide. One by one, I won over the doubters, the skeptics, through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to transparency and integrity. As for Derek and Marissa, their fall from grace was as swift as it was brutal. With the legal walls closing in and their reputations in tatters, they found themselves social pariahs, shunned and ostracized by their former circles. I caught wind of Marissa's spectacular downfall. She'd been fired from her cushy marketing job, her severance package revoked in light of the scandal. Her family had disowned her, and her so-called friends had abandoned her, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. As for Derek, well, let's just say that his newfound status as a convicted felon didn't exactly open many doors in the business world. The once mighty titan had been reduced to a punchline, a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. And me? I stood at the helm of my company, battered but unbroken, a phoenix rising from the ashes of Derek's betrayal. The road ahead was long and arduous, but I was ready to rebuild, to reclaim what was mine, and to emerge stronger than ever before. Derek and Marissa had tried to break me, but in the end they had only forged me into steel. In the aftermath of Derek's dramatic unraveling, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. The lying, cheating scumbag had finally received his comeuppance, his life in ruins, a fitting punishment for the devastation he'd wrought. But even as I savored my hard-won victory, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at me. Derek's final threat still echoed in my mind, a dark promise that my struggles were far from over. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the other shoe dropped. I was in the middle of a meeting with the marketing team, discussing strategies to rebuild our brand's tarnished image, when Alex burst through the door, his expression thunderous. "Elena, we need to talk. Now." His tone brooked no argument. I excused myself, dread coiling in the pit of my stomach, and followed Alex to his office. He wasted no time in dropping the bombshell. "Derek's filed a lawsuit against you and the company," he growled, slamming a thick stack of papers onto his desk. "He's claiming you orchestrated a campaign of defamation and destroyed his career out of spite." White-hot fury surged through my veins as I scanned the documents. Are you kidding me? After everything that Snake did, the fraud, the embezzlement, the affair, he has the audacity to play the victim? Alex held up a placating hand. I know, and trust me, this case is weaker than a wet paper bag. But it's still going to be a massive headache, not to mention a PR nightmare. I gritted my teeth, steeling my resolve. So be it. We'll fight this like we've fought everything else Derek's thrown our way, with the truth on our side. The ensuing legal battle was nothing short of a circus, a spectacle of mudslinging and personal attacks that played out in the public eye. Derek's lawyers painted him as a tragic figure, a devoted family man, driven to desperate measures by a cold, neglectful wife. I scoffed at the absurd notion, but the accusations stung nonetheless. How dare he try to twist the narrative, to rewrite history, and absolve himself of his own despicable actions? In the end, though, facts proved far more potent than fiction. With the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, financial records, witness testimonies, even Derek's own incriminating messages, his flimsy case crumbled like a house of cards. The final nail in the coffin came when Marissa took the stand. Faced with the prospect of perjury charges, she sang like a canary, spilling every sordid detail of her affair with Derek and their conspiracy to defraud my company. I'll never forget the look on Derek's face as Marissa delivered her damning testimony, his mask of righteous indignation melting away to reveal the sniveling coward beneath. In that moment, he knew he was beaten, his last desperate gambit thwarted. When the verdict finally came down, it was a resounding victory for our side. Derek's lawsuit was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay exorbitant legal fees and damages. But that wasn't the end of his humiliation. As I left the courthouse, flanked by Alex and a throng of reporters, Derek emerged from the building, his head hung in defeat. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred burning in his gaze. "You won't get away with this," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll make sure you pay for what you've done, even if it's the last thing I do." A mirthless chuckle escaped my lips as I regarded the pathetic shell of a man before me. "You're the one who's going to pay, Derek, for the rest of your miserable life." With that, I turned on my heel and strode away, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his own making. The war was over, and I had emerged victorious, but at what cost? As the celebrations died down and the dust settled, I found myself alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. What should have been a moment of triumph felt hollow somehow, tainted by the bitter aftertaste of revenge. Had it all been worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth tactics? Or had I lost a piece of myself along the way, sacrificed on the altar of vindication? A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that perhaps there was another way, a path that didn't involve sinking to Derek's level of depravity. But it was too late for such musings now. The die had been cast, and there was no going back. All I could do was soldier on, rebuild what had been broken, and pray that the hollow ache in my chest would eventually fade. Derek and Marissa had been vanquished, but at what price? Only time would tell if the cost of my vengeance was one I could truly stomach. In the weeks following my courtroom triumph over Derek's petty lawsuit, an uneasy truce settled over the battlefield. The war may have been won, but the scars ran deep for both sides. I threw myself into the task of rebuilding, working tirelessly to restore my company's tarnished reputation and repair the damage wrought by Derek's deception. With each small victory, a new client, a positive press mention, a rising stock price, the hollow ache in my chest began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Derek, on the other hand, had well and truly fallen from grace. His once glittering career lay in ruins, the mighty Titan reduced to a cautionary tale. I caught wind of his sordid downfall through the grapevine. No reputable firm would touch him, his reputation forever tainted by his criminal convictions. As for Marissa, well, let's just say karma has a way of evening the scales. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "You'll never guess what fresh hell our favorite dysfunctional duo has landed themselves in," he announced, settling into the chair opposite my desk. I arched an eyebrow, equal parts intrigued and wary. "Do I even want to know?" Alex's grin widened as he slid a folder across the desk. "See for yourself." I flipped it open, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. "You can't be serious." "As a heart attack," Alex confirmed. "Derek and Marissa are being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, you name it. Seems our little whistleblower friend was just the tip of the iceberg." A bitter chuckle escaped my lips as I digested the news. I never thought I'd see the day. "Well, believe it, sister," Alex crowed. "Those two snakes are finally getting the book thrown at them. Hard." In the days that followed, the sordid details of Derek and Marissa's far-reaching criminal enterprise trickled out, each revelation more shocking than the last. They'd been living a double life, using my company as a front to funnel illicit funds, evade taxes, and line their own pockets. The evidence was damning, overwhelming, and this time there was no wiggle room, no legal loopholes for Derek's team of shysters to exploit. He and Marissa were well and truly boxed in, the walls closing in around them. I'll never forget the day they were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, a pathetic sight to behold. Derek, once so poised and confident, hung his head in shame, his expensive suit rumpled and disheveled. Marissa, for her part, maintained a haughty air of defiance, but I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. The trial was little more than a formality, a public crucifixion to lay bare their myriad sins. Witness after witness took the stand, each more damaging than the last, until the weight of their guilt became too massive to deny. When the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was over, truly and finally over. Derek and Marissa's twisted game of deceit and betrayal had been blown wide open, their misdeeds exposed for the world to see. As they were led away in chains, Marissa caught my eye, her gaze burning with impotent rage. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Here were two souls so consumed by greed and hubris that they'd sacrificed everything, their reputations, their freedom, their very souls. Derek, on the other hand, refused to meet my gaze, his eyes downcast in bitter resignation. The mighty had well and truly fallen, brought low by his own avarice and depravity. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the media circus died down, I found myself standing atop the rubble of our once idyllic lives, a victor surveying the hard-won battlefield. It was finally over. But as I looked out over the smoldering wreckage, I couldn't help but wonder, at what cost had this victory come? What parts of myself had I sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance? And was it all truly worth it in the end? Only time would tell, I supposed, as I turned my back on the past and strode forward into an uncertain future. The war was won, but the scars would linger. In the months following Derek and Marissa's dramatic downfall, an uneasy calm settled over my life. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a strange, unsettling calm in its wake. With the legal battles and PR firestorms firmly in the rearview mirror, I found myself adrift, unmoored from the singular purpose that had driven me for so long. Vengeance had been my guiding star, my reason for breathing, and now that it had been achieved, I felt oddly hollow, untethered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the immediate aftermath of Derek and Marissa's sentencing, a wave of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the demons that had haunted me for so long vanquished. I could breathe again, live again, free from the weight of their betrayal. Or so I thought. The first few weeks passed in a blur of celebration and congratulations. Alex threw a raucous party at his place, a veritable who's who of the city's legal elite in attendance, all eager to toast the downfall of the dastardly duo. I plastered on a smile and made the rounds, accepting drinks and backslaps with practiced grace. But underneath the veneer of polite socialization, a part of me felt off, out of place, like an interloper at my own victory party. As the weeks stretched into months, that sense of disconnection only deepened. Logically, I knew I should have been over the moon. I'd not only survived Derek's betrayal but emerged victorious, my reputation and company intact. But the nagging feeling persisted, like a tiny voice whispering in the back of my mind. Was it really a victory if it had cost me a piece of my soul? I tried to lose myself in work, throwing every ounce of my energy into rebuilding my company's battered public image. New initiatives were launched, charitable foundations established, all in the name of scrubbing the stain left by Derek's misdeeds. And yet, no matter how many 16-hour days I pulled, how many millions I funneled into good PR, that empty ache lingered, a constant companion I couldn't seem to shake. It all came to a head one night as I sat alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on my desk, the amber liquid swirling in the glass clutched in my hand. A soft rap at the door roused me from my reverie. "Come in," I called out, not bothering to turn around. "Working late again, I see." Alex's familiar drawl reached my ears as he settled into the chair opposite my desk. "You know, they make these newfangled things called vacations these days. Might want to look into one." I huffed out a mirthless chuckle, swirling the contents of my glass. You know me, Alex. No rest for the wicked and all that. He was silent for a beat, studying me with those perceptive eyes of his. You don't seem terribly celebratory for someone who just took down public enemy number one. I sighed, finally meeting his gaze. I don't know, Alex. I should be over the moon, right? Derek and Marissa are behind bars, my company's back on track. But I trailed off, struggling to put the gnawing disquiet into words. But something's still eating at you, he finished, giving me a knowing look. You got your revenge, Elena. The question is, was it worth it? His words hung in the air, heavy and laden with implication. Was it worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth campaign that had nearly consumed me? In that moment, the weight of everything I'd sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance came crashing down around me. The person I'd allowed myself to become, the moral lines I'd crossed, had it truly been a fair trade for seeing Derek punished? The bitter taste of self-loathing flooded my mouth, and I slammed my glass down with a trembling hand. No, it wasn't worth it. The admission hung between us, raw and painful. After a long, weighty silence, Alex spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Then it's time to leave the past in the past, my friend. Time to start over, to become the person you want to be, not the one forged in the fires of revenge. His words rang true, a clarion call amidst the storm of self-doubt that had consumed me for so long. It was time to let go, to shed the burdens of the past and step into the light. A fragile smile tugged at my lips as I met Alex's gaze, the first sparks of hope flickering to life in my chest. You're right, I whispered, the weight already beginning to lift from my shoulders. It's time for a new beginning. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges and inner demons to conquer, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a sense of purpose unclouded by rage or thirst for retribution. It was time to be reborn, to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of my own making. Derek and Marissa's betrayal may have broken me once, but I was determined to emerge from the crucible stronger, wiser, my soul intact. A new chapter was beginning, and this time the pen was firmly in my own hand. I stared in disbelief at the small rectangular box nestled between the seats of Trent's car. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the burgundy velvet glinting under the dim garage light. This was the anniversary gift I had been eagerly anticipating for weeks, the one that never materialized. Lifting the lid, I felt my heart sink. Inside lay a sparkling diamond necklace, the price tag still attached. A small note scrawled on the box's inner lining read, "To my darling Clara, love Trent." My vision blurred as tears welled up. How could this be happening? We had been married for 15 years, and Trent and I had built a comfortable life together. Or so I had thought. This gift, this betrayal, shattered that illusion. As I sank onto the cold cement floor, a crumpled piece of paper caught my eye. Unfolding it, I found a child's drawing, crudely depicting a family of 3, a woman, a man, and a young girl. At the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, were the words, "Daddy Trent." The pieces fell into place. Trent's late nights at the office, his constant excuses to be away from home, he had another family, another life that he was leading behind my back. All those years I had proudly called myself his wife, the mother of his children. It was all a lie. Rage bubbled within me, threatening to consume me. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there. But instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to think rationally. I needed to gather more evidence, to uncover the full extent of his betrayal, before I confronted him. Carefully, I placed the necklace and the drawing back in the box, tucking it into my purse. As I made my way back to the house, I could feel the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. How could I face Trent now, knowing what I knew? The trust we had built over the years, the foundation of our marriage, had crumbled. That night, as Trent sat across the dinner table from me, chatting amiably about his day, I struggled to maintain my composure. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I held my tongue. I needed to be strategic, to plan my next move carefully. After the children had been put to bed, I followed Trent into the living room where he settled into his favorite armchair, flipping on the TV. Taking a seat beside him, I cleared my throat. "Trent, we need to talk." He glanced up, his brow furrowing. "What's wrong, honey?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. I found something in your car today, something that belongs to someone else. Trent's eyes widened and a flicker of panic crossed his face. What are you talking about? The anniversary gift you never gave me, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. The one you bought for your mistress, Clara. Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there frozen, his guilt etched on his features. And that's not all, I continued, pulling the drawing from my purse and thrusting it at him. Who's this little girl, Trent? Another one of your secrets. Trent's face paled, and he ran a hand through his hair, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. Rena, I can explain. Save it, I snapped, holding up a hand to silence him. I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, the finality of my statement sending a chill through the room. Trent stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. In that moment, I knew this was the end of our marriage, the end of the life I had known, but I was done being the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny. The tension in the room was palpable as Trent and I stared at each other, the silence punctuated only by the muffled sound of the television. I could see the cogs turning in his mind, scrambling to come up with some feeble excuse, but I was done listening to his lies. Well, I snapped, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Aren't you going to say anything? Trent cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room, anywhere but meeting my gaze. Rena, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Sorry? I scoffed, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. You're sorry? Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How much you've betrayed me and our family? He winced, his shoulders slumping, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions. It's not what you think, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. It's a complicated situation. I let out a humorless laugh. Complicated? Trent, you're having an affair and you've got another child. How is that in any way complicated? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his brow furrowed in a futile attempt to find the right words. I watched as the realization dawned on him. There was no way to spin this, no way to make it sound even remotely acceptable. I don't know what to say, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Say? I leaned forward, my eyes blazing with fury. How about you start by admitting that you're a liar and a cheater, that you've been living a double life, betraying our marriage and our family? Trent flinched, and I knew I had struck a nerve. Good. Let him feel the weight of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, reaching out to me. I know this looks bad, but don't you dare touch me, I snarled, jerking away from his outstretched hand. You lost the right to do that the moment you decided to stick your dick in someone else. Trent's face flushed, and he opened and closed his mouth a few times, like a fish out of water. I took a grim satisfaction in seeing him squirm, his usual air of confidence and control completely shattered. I don't know what to say, he finally managed, his voice trembling. That's the problem, Trent, I said, my voice dripping with disdain. You've said enough. Now it's time for you to listen. I reached into my purse and pulled out the box containing the diamond necklace, tossing it onto his lap. This is your darling Clara's gift, isn't it? And this, I dropped the child's drawing on top of the box, is your other family, isn't it? Trent stared at the items, his face a mask of shame and guilt. I watched as he ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, I can explain. No, I cut him off, my voice firm. I don't want your explanations. I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of fear in them. Good. Let him be afraid. A divorce? He sputtered. But what about Evelyn? You can't just abandon her. She needs us. I felt my jaw tighten, the mention of my insufferable mother-in-law only fueling my anger. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your problem now. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to take responsibility for your actions. Trent opened his mouth, but no words came out. He sat there staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation, and I knew in that moment that the balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the victim, but the one in control. In the days that followed my confrontation with Trent, I felt a sense of renewed purpose. The initial shock and heartbreak had given way to a steely determination to take control of my life. I started freelancing again, leveraging my marketing expertise to build up a stable income stream. Trent, of course, was less than thrilled about this, insisting that my place was at home, caring for Evelyn and the children. "Rena, you can't just abandon your responsibilities," he would argue, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Evelyn needs you, and the kids need a stable home." I would simply fix him with a hard stare, my lips pressed into a thin line. "Trent, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm taking care of myself for a change. You can handle Evelyn and the children. After all, you seem to have plenty of experience juggling multiple families." The jab would instantly wipe the self-righteous expression off his face, and he would sulk off, muttering under his breath. I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I had the upper hand now, that I held the power to make his life just as miserable as he had made mine. As I worked tirelessly, building up my freelance business, I also made it a point to thoroughly document Trent's misdeeds. I combed through our financial records, uncovering a trail of suspicious expenses. Expensive dinners, lavish gifts, even a down payment on a second apartment. It was clear that Trent had been pouring a significant amount of our family's resources into maintaining his secret life with Clara. Armed with this evidence, I began to quietly siphon funds into a separate account, stashing away money for my own future. Trent, of course, remained blissfully unaware of my activities, too focused on his own devious schemes to pay much attention to our household finances. As Evelyn's health continued to decline, Trent's neglect of her became increasingly evident. I would often arrive home to find the house in disarray, Evelyn's needs unattended to. It infuriated me, but I remained outwardly calm, biding my time and carefully planning my next move. One particularly trying day, I arrived home to find Evelyn sitting in her wheelchair, her hair disheveled and her clothes stained. Trent was nowhere to be seen, and when I asked Evelyn where he was, she merely shrugged, her eyes glazed over with a mix of confusion and resentment. "That no-good son of mine is off doing God knows what," she grumbled, her voice laced with bitterness, "leaving me here to rot, just like he does every day." I bit my tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I gently helped Evelyn into the bathroom, carefully bathing and dressing her. As I brushed her hair, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the old woman. Beneath her caustic exterior, she was just as much a victim of Trent's betrayal as I was. Later that night, as Trent stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and the familiar scent of Clara's perfume, I confronted him. "Trent, we need to talk about Evelyn. She's not doing well, and you're hardly ever here to help." He waved a dismissive hand, his gaze unfocused. "Evelyn's fine, Rena. She's got you to take care of her, doesn't she? That's what you're here for, after all." I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Trent, this isn't sustainable. Evelyn needs more attention and care than I can provide on my own. We need to start looking into assisted living options for her." Trent's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. I'm not putting my mother in some home. She belongs here, with her family." "Then you need to start being a part of this family, Trent," I retorted, my voice strained. "Evelyn is your responsibility too, and you're failing her just as much as you're failing me and the kids." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "I'm done discussing this. I've already started looking into options for Evelyn, and I'll be making the necessary arrangements, with or without your input." Trent glared at me, his jaw clenched, but I could see the hint of fear in his eyes. He knew I was serious, that I was no longer willing to be the dutiful wife and caretaker. I was taking control of my own life, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. As Evelyn's demands grew more and more taxing, I found myself increasingly isolated. Trent's disinterest in his mother's care only intensified, and he spent more and more time with Clara, leaving me to shoulder the burden alone. I would come home to find Evelyn in her wheelchair, her medications scattered on the floor and her dinner untouched. She would berate me endlessly, her sharp tongue lashing out with a venomous fury that only added to my exhaustion. "Where's that useless son of mine?" she would snarl, her eyes narrowed to slits. "Off gallivanting with his whore, no doubt. And you, Rena, you're just as useless, letting this place fall to pieces." I would grit my teeth, biting back the retort that threatened to spill out. Instead, I would silently tend to Evelyn's needs, carefully administering her medications and ensuring she was fed and comfortable. It was a thankless task, but I knew I had to keep my composure if I wanted to execute my plan. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Trent burst through the front door, his face flushed and his eyes wild. "Rena, we need to talk," he announced, his voice quivering with a strange mixture of panic and excitement. I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Trent?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting around the room as if he was afraid someone might overhear. "It's Clara. She's pregnant." I felt my heart drop, the dish towel slipping from my grasp as a wave of nausea washed over me. Of course, I had suspected as much, but hearing the confirmation still hit me like a punch to the gut. "Pregnant?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I suppose you're the father." Trent nodded, a strange glint of pride in his eyes. Yes, I am. And I want you to leave, Rena. I want a divorce. I want to be with Clara and our child." I stared at him, my mind reeling. After all this time, after all the pain and betrayal, he had the audacity to demand a divorce on his terms, as if I was some inconvenience to be discarded. "You want me to leave?" I repeated, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You're the one who's been having an affair, Trent. You're the one who's been living a double life and betraying our family, and now you have the nerve to tell me to leave?" Trent held up his hands, a placating gesture. "Rena, please, try to understand. This is my chance to start a new life, to be a father to my child. I can't be tied down to you and Evelyn anymore." I felt my fingers curl into fists, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. Tied down? Is that how you see me, Trent? As some burden to be cast aside? He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice rising in pitch. "No, Trent, you don't get to make this decision for me. I'm the one who's been betrayed, who's been left to pick up the pieces of your selfish, despicable actions. And I'm not going anywhere." Trent's eyes widened, and he took a step back, as if he had not anticipated my vehement refusal. "Rena, you don't understand," he tried to explain, his voice tinged with desperation. "This is my chance to be happy, to have the family I always wanted." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "The family you always wanted? Trent, you already had a family. You had a wife and children who loved you, and you threw that all away for some cheap affair and a mistress who's now carrying your child." Trent's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "No, Trent, you made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. I'm not leaving, and I'm not giving you a divorce. You're going to have to deal with me, with Evelyn, and with the mess you've created." The finality in my tone seemed to hit Trent like a physical blow, and he stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly. I could see the realization dawning on him, that he had underestimated my resilience, my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. In that moment, I felt a surge of power, a sense of control that I hadn't experienced in years. Trent was no longer the one in charge. I was. And I was going to use that power to bring him down, to make him pay for the pain he had caused. The tension in the house was palpable as Trent and I faced off, our once loving marriage reduced to a battlefield of accusation and recrimination. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel. "Rena, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children." I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. "Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara?" I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. "And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable." Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. "I have evidence, Trent," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I've been documenting everything, your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you." His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. "Rena, you can't." "I can, and I will," I interrupted, my resolve hardening. "You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price." Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. "Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise." I shook my head, unwavering. No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly, as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us. I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. No, Trent. I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me. I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer. Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll do anything. Just don't do this. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. The air was thick with tension as Trent and I faced off in the middle of the living room, the evidence of his betrayal clutched tightly in my hand. I could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling. Rena, please, he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. Think about what you're doing. Think about our family, our children. I let out a humorless laugh, shaking my head. Our family, Trent? Don't you mean your family with Clara? I paused, pinning him with a hard stare. And as for the children, I'm doing this for them. I'm not going to let them grow up thinking that this kind of betrayal is acceptable. Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I held up a hand, silencing him. I have evidence, Trent, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I've been documenting everything. Your financial misdeeds, your neglect of Evelyn, your affair with Clara, and I'm going to use it all against you. His eyes widened, and I could see the color drain from his face. Rena, you can't. I can, and I will, I interrupted, my resolve hardening. You've betrayed me, Trent. You've betrayed our family, and now you're going to pay the price. Trent ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I had come to recognize over the years. Rena, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out, I promise. I shook my head, unwavering. No, Trent, there's nothing to talk about. I want a divorce, and I want it now. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Trent stared at me, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of my demand sank in. But what about Evelyn? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't just abandon her, Rena. She needs us. I felt a surge of anger at his pathetic attempt to manipulate me. Don't you dare try to guilt me, Trent. Evelyn is your responsibility, not mine. You're the one who's been neglecting her, not me. Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, my voice sharp and unyielding. No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. And as for the children, I'll be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms. Trent's face twisted with a mixture of shock and fury. You can't do this, Rena. You can't take my children away from me. I held up the manila envelope I had been clutching, the evidence of his misdeeds tucked neatly inside. I can, and I will, Trent, unless you want me to expose your affair and your financial misdeeds to your family, your friends, and your employer. Trent's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He had underestimated me, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. Rena, please, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I'll do anything, just don't do this. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. It's too late for that, Trent. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Trent standing in the middle of the living room, his world crumbling around him. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. It was time to take control of my own destiny, even if it meant destroying the man I had once loved. As I made my way to the bedroom, I could hear Trent's desperate calls echoing behind me. "Rena, please, don't do this. Think of the children." But I refused to look back, my mind set on the path I had chosen. Once in the bedroom, I locked the door and sank down onto the bed, my hands trembling as I opened the envelope. The evidence was damning: bank statements, credit card records, even tawdry love letters from Clara. I could feel my heart racing as I sorted through the papers, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. I knew that what I was about to do would change everything, but I was no longer willing to be the victim. Trent had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. With a deep breath, I began making the necessary phone calls, to my lawyer, to Trent's family, to his employer. The words spilled out of me, my voice calm and steady as I laid bare the full extent of Trent's betrayal. As the news of his affair and financial misdeeds began to spread, I could feel the balance of power shifting. Trent's world was crumbling around him, and I took a grim satisfaction in knowing that I was the one who had brought him down. In the aftermath, Trent pleaded with me, begging for a second chance, but I refused to budge. I was done being the dutiful wife, the silent sufferer. It was time for me to take control of my own life, even if it meant sacrificing the man I had once loved. As the divorce proceedings began, I steeled myself for the battles to come. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight for my freedom, for my children, and for the life I deserved. The divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of emotions and legal maneuvering, but I remained steadfast in my determination to reclaim my life. Trent, once the confident breadwinner of our family, now found himself on the defensive, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of my evidence. During the heated negotiations, Trent made one last-ditch effort to sway me, appealing to my sense of duty and responsibility. "Rena, think of Evelyn," he pleaded, his eyes desperate. "She needs us, both of us. You can't just abandon her." I leveled him with a cold stare, the memories of his neglect and betrayal fueling my resolve. "Evelyn is your responsibility, Trent, not mine. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, and they don't include your family." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "No, Trent, I'm done being the dutiful wife and caretaker. It's time for you to step up and take care of your own mother. As for the children, I will be filing for full custody. You can see them, but only under my terms." The color drained from Trent's face, and I could see the panic setting in. He knew that he had lost, that the once formidable control he had wielded over our lives was slipping through his fingers. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and produced a set of keys. "Fine, Rena. Take the house. Take the kids, but promise me you'll at least let me see them occasionally." I regarded him coolly, my lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course, Trent, but understand this. I will not tolerate any more of your lies or your betrayals. If you so much as set a foot out of line, I will make your life a living hell." Trent flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand," he mumbled. As the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had reclaimed my freedom, yes, my independence, and my children. Trent, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. With the help of my lawyer, I exposed the full extent of Trent's infidelity and financial misdeeds to his family, his friends, and his employer. The fallout was swift and merciless, as Trent found himself shunned by those he had once counted as allies. His job, his social standing, and even his relationship with his own mother, Evelyn, who had once been his staunchest defender, all crumbled around him. I watched with a grim satisfaction as he spiraled into a pit of despair, his once confident demeanor reduced to a shadow of its former self. As for Evelyn, she too was forced to confront the reality of her son's failures. With Trent no longer able to provide for her, she reluctantly agreed to move into an assisted living facility, where she would receive the care and attention she so desperately needed. I knew that my decision to leave Trent and divorce him would not be an easy one, but as I settled into our new home with my children, I felt a sense of peace and empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer the victim, but the victor, and I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my career, reconnecting with friends, and providing a stable, loving environment for my children. Trent, meanwhile, struggled to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, his attempts at reconciliation falling on deaf ears. As I watched him spiral downward, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. But it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of relief and liberation that I felt. I was finally free, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the dust settled on my divorce from Trent, I found myself emerging from the ashes of our shattered marriage with a newfound sense of purpose and freedom. Gone were the days of constantly worrying about Evelyn's demands, Trent's infidelity, and the responsibilities that had once weighed me down. I threw myself into rebuilding my career, leveraging my marketing expertise to secure a series of lucrative freelance contracts. The extra income allowed me to provide a comfortable life for my children and to focus on my own well-being after years of putting everyone else first. Trent, on the other hand, continued to spiral downward. His dismissal from his high-profile job, coupled with the public humiliation of his affair and financial misdeeds, left him a shell of his former self. I watched with a mixture of pity and satisfaction as he struggled to find his footing, his once confident demeanor reduced to a desperate plea for forgiveness. "Raina, please," he begged during one of our court-ordered mediation sessions, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. Can't we work something out?" I regarded him coolly, my arms crossed over my chest. "Work something out, Trent? You had your chance to make things right, and you chose to betray me and our family instead." I paused, shaking my head. "No, Trent, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your actions." Trent opened his mouth to protest, but the mediator quickly intervened, steering the conversation back to the matter at hand: the custody and financial arrangements. In the end, I was granted full custody of our children, with Trent relegated to supervised visitation. He was also required to provide a significant portion of his income as child support, a consequence he clearly resented but was powerless to fight. As I left the courthouse, my children in tow, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and empowerment. The nightmare of my marriage to Trent was finally over, and I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms. Over the next few months, I focused on establishing a stable and nurturing environment for my children. We moved into a cozy apartment, and I made sure to set aside dedicated time for family activities and outings. The kids, who had once been caught in the crossfire of Trent's betrayal, slowly began to blossom, their laughter and joy a testament to the healing power of a loving, stable home. Trent, meanwhile, continued to struggle. He lost his job, his savings depleted by the divorce and child support payments. Evelyn, abandoned by both Trent and Clara, had no choice but to enter an assisted living facility, a decision that only added to Trent's woes. I heard through the grapevine that Trent had tried to reach out to Clara, hoping to rekindle their relationship, but she wanted nothing to do with him. Apparently, even the woman he had betrayed his family for had decided that he was more trouble than he was worth. As I watched Trent's downward spiral, I felt a sense of vindication, but also a twinge of pity. He had lost everything: his family, his career, his social standing. And while a part of me couldn't help but feel a measure of satisfaction in his comeuppance, another part of me recognized the pain and anguish he must be experiencing. But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the bright future that lay ahead of me and my children. We had weathered the storm of Trent's betrayal, and we were stronger for it. And as I looked towards the horizon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation for what the future had in store.
As casually as though she were inviting me to lunch, she asked, "How about living at my place?" I had run out of things to say. After all, she, Susan, became my employer after serving as my team leader at my former workplace. It was approximately a year ago. 3 more months have passed since the story's start. The department had called out to me in a frustrated tone as soon as I got to the office that morning. "Hey, Mike, what on earth is this?" He tossed a brochure of brand new cell phone covers onto his desk as I approached it. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the cell phone cover design was exactly the same as the one I had already finished. You said you wanted to redo it, even though you got the go-ahead last time, didn't you? Yes, that's because I came up with a better idea, and so I discussed it with the leader. And did you really sell your design elsewhere? No way, that's impossible. Here it was though. A different company was producing my rejected design. I didn't know why. I searched for assistance from Susan, my team leader. Then I recalled that she was out of town till tomorrow on a work trip. You're fired, effective today. Contract termination entails my termination. I was abruptly fired from the company after being unfairly charged. I design products for a living. Product designers create a wide range of things, from industrial apparatus to everyday essentials and domestic items. While some manufacturers use their own designers, others hire design firms to do the work. Before I was engaged as a contract employee at the design firm, I was in charge of product planning and manufacturing that placed design orders. However, I finally developed an interest in design and quit my position to study it at a national school. After that, I lost my job. I was at my desk packing up my things when I heard murmured voices coming from both sides. They were Ken and John, who joined different teams, but both became contract workers around the same time as me. They were both worried about me. Did you really sell it? Ken said, glancing at my expression as I described the circumstances. No way, exclaimed John. There must be a mistake. Well, it's all right. I wanted to work on something bigger anyhow. I responded, acting as though I had a lot of leeway at best. I purchased some beer and some munchies from a local convenience store on my way home. I was frustrated and drinking at home. When the sun was still up, I began drinking, and by dusk, I was totally inebriated. You're home early, Mike. Why are you already intoxicated? Emily, my live-in girlfriend, had come home from work. She sighed deeply when I informed her that I had been dismissed, adding, I told you over and over to give up on being a designer. I met Emily at the manufacturer I used to work for. She still works there. She strongly opposed my career change, insisting that it would be more stable if I stayed with a large company. When I did change jobs, there was a gap between Emily and me. Shut up. I wanted to be a designer. What's wrong with that? In the end, was I wrong, or was I mistaken? I drank myself into oblivion, my head spinning, and I ended up passing out. The next day, I slept until just before noon on the living room floor. Emily had already gone to work. As I was drinking a glass of water just after waking up, the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, there stood my team leader, Susan. Oh, just woke up. You look awful. Why? I'm coming in. She didn't wait for my response and just barged into the room. A bit of drowning your sorrows last night, she said, after seeing the large number of empty beer cans left on the table. Well, something like that. I'm going on a binge right now. It's lunchtime anyway. Come on, I've bought loads down at the town square. Let's eat together. Honestly, I had no appetite, but I had no choice but to say yes. More importantly, why did you quit the company? 2. What? Why is that all you can say? She laughed as she said this, looking at my surprised face. She had finished a business trip and had gone to the office that morning, where she was informed about the termination of my contract and the reason for it. She had gotten into an argument with the boss. She insisted that there was no way I would sell my designs to another company, but the boss was adamant that my designs had actually been productized. In the end, he rebuked her as team leader, saying, You've been negligent in your supervision. He said I was negligent, so I said then I'll take responsibility and I quit. She said this robustly while biting into a fried chicken drumstick. So now, because of me, you too. I've been at odds with that hard-headed man for a while now. She then looked at me seriously, adjusting her posture. You just left your job yesterday, and you haven't decided on your next job yet, right? Yes, I have no prospects. Then work with me. Work with you. I couldn't grasp the meaning, so she explained she had decided to take this opportunity to start her own design firm. She had been considering going independent and had saved up for it. The salary might be lower at first, but only for a little while. Just bear with it. In other words, she wanted me to be the first employee of her new design company. Sure, if you want me. She thanked me and offered both her greasy hands for a handshake. I shook her hands, though somewhat bewildered. Her hands were sticky from the fried chicken. Honestly, I was puzzled as to why she had invited me to be her first employee. Until then, she had been giving various orders to other team members, juggling multiple projects but rarely giving me advice, assigning me only one project at a time. I had always thought that I was neither expected nor evaluated. Now, even though she said she was starting a company, her home apartment served as both an office and a residence for the time being. It's all about cutting costs. Speaking of cutting costs, instead of relying on a lawyer for the company's registration, Susan did it herself by going to the local legal office. Of course, she was also running around for sales activities alongside that. Her past achievements paid off, and we were inundated with jobs for designs. I worked selflessly on those jobs. Sometimes work ended late at night, and I often stayed over at her home, which also served as the office. The company's name is S&T Design. When I showed the business card of the newly formed company to Emily a few days after returning home, she said, with a bored look, "What's her name again?" "Susan." "Susan, so the S is for Susan, and the T is because you're Tom. So it's Susan and Tom." Then Emily flicked the business card she was holding onto the table and glared at me. "What is it?" "Nothing, just thought you two must be getting along well." Emily was clearly jealous. She misunderstood the relationship between her and me in a strange way. We were only work partners, her and me. Since then, there was not just a gap between Emily and me, but a deep rift. Sometime later, on a Saturday, I had stayed over for 2 days and was catching up on the backlog of work. I was almost done. "How about taking off early today when you reach a good stopping point?" Susan seemed to care about me struggling just a bit more and wanted me to go home early. "I'll manage to finish by the end of the night." "Come on, you're overworking. Go home now. This is an order from your boss." I was patted on the shoulder by her and decided to wrap up work. I was about to call Emily, who was supposed to be home, but I stopped. I wanted to surprise her by coming home unexpectedly. I stopped by Emily's favorite bakery and bought a surprise cake as a gift. I opened the front door without making a noise. There were men's shoes I didn't recognize. I thought we had a visitor. I could hear the sound of a comedy show from the TV in the living room, but there was no sign of the visitor or Emily in the living room. "Where's Emily?" I opened the door to the bedroom. Emily was asleep on the bed, her head resting on the chest of a man I didn't know. "Emily? No." "Why are you back?" The man hurriedly got dressed, said something cheeky like, "See you later," to Emily, and hurried out. Emily sat on the bed with a sullen face, wrapped in a blanket. I threw the cake in its box at Emily, crammed my belongings into my backpack, and yelled, "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later. I'll let you know before I come." I stormed out. I wandered the streets with nowhere to go. Of course, I couldn't possibly go back and stay at work. I thought about calling Ken or John, my fellow contract workers, and telling them what had happened. What am I going to say? That I broke up with the girl I was living with and moved out. Certainly, no doubt they would interrogate me, digging into every detail. Even I'm hurt by all of this. Drinking some booze and talking, I'm sure I'd end up crying. Eventually, I decided to stay in a comic book cafe until Monday morning. "Oh, were you off camping for the weekend?" she said on Monday, noticing my backpack as I was heading to work. "No, I've moved out of the house." "Did you have a fight with her?" "We broke up." She looked shocked for a moment, then said, "I don't know the details, but as a preface, why don't you live at my place?" As I hesitated, she added, "I don't mind at all. After all, you've stayed over plenty of times before." But that was for work. Never mind that. I found this old business card while I was sorting through some things. Look at this. The card she handed me was from when I was in charge of product planning at a manufacturer. "Why do you have this?" "We exchanged cards a long time ago. You don't remember, do you? I was at the design company before the one I'm at now." I had no memory of it, but she had been in charge of the design when my company had hired her. Usually, we would have multiple meetings to finalize the design, including the concept and functionality of the product. I made a few revisions to the rough sketch, and the design was pretty much settled. But you, a rookie, came to observe the meeting. I was trying to recall the time while listening to her story about when we exchanged business cards. You were so stiff, barely looking at anyone's face, and your hands were shaking. "I wondered if you were going to be okay as a newbie," she said with a chuckle. I could only respond with an embarrassed smile, feeling both pathetic and ashamed. At the end of the meeting, someone said, "Mike, tell us your thoughts. You were so nervous that your voice was cracking, and you said something completely off the wall." But it was something none of us would have ever thought of. I thought, what's with this, Emmer? What kind of ridiculous thing had I said? I couldn't remember. I thought that, but at the same time, I wondered where such an idea had come from, which I couldn't do. I thought I was frustrated. If this guy gets involved in design, won't it be something incredible? I can't lose to him with that. She stood up from her chair. I looked down, embarrassed. "The point is, we've known each other for a long time, so it's fine. Don't worry about it. Just live here." The punchline of the story being that I should live here was confusing, but it somehow made me feel inclined to agree. "Oh, but you'll have to see something awful every morning." "What is it exactly?" "My face without makeup." I stayed at her house as a temporary place to live until I could find a new home. The layout had a living and dining room used as an office and her bedroom, plus one more room. She suggested I use that room, but I declined, opting to lay out a sleeping bag on the living room floor. When I slept, we sometimes ate together and sometimes separate, but since neither of us cooked much, we ordered delivery or ate food we bought outside. Thus began our strange cohabitation. In about half a month, I had passed. We were working in the room when her cell phone rang. "Oh, Ken. Long time, no see." It seemed to be from Ken, my contract colleague. She listened to Ken's story, nodding, and said, "There is always next year. Don't be discouraged." "Yeah, he's here living at my place." "No, it's different. My home is currently a home office and company housing." She said this and hung up, laughing. "Ken? As in that Ken?" "Yes, he says hi." From the conversation, it seemed that Ken knew I was living here. Ken didn't become a full-time employee. Just another one-year contract. We had a one-year contract, but one of us had been offered the possibility of being promoted to a full-time position after the term. In my mind, the ranking of excellence was Mike, Ken, and then John. Defying her expectations this time, John got the full-time position. Wait, does that mean in Susan's view I was the best? Hey, when you were the leader, you hardly gave me any advice and only assigned me one task at a time. Right? What's wrong with that? Does that mean you didn't think much of me? Don't be foolish, it's the opposite, actually. The reason she didn't advise me was that there was no need to. She didn't make me multitask because she wanted me to focus on the cases she deemed important or difficult. Hearing that, I felt so happy that I wanted to jump for joy. After that, work went smoothly. Though I was planning to find a new place to live right away, the end of the year was approaching, and I was still living in her apartment. "It's cold today," she said, stamping her feet in front of the space heater after returning from outside. "They say there's a big cold wave coming." Well, I can't be defeated by a cold wave. There's a lot of work ahead. She had secured a new business opportunity upon visiting a client. However, it was a competition with another company. If we won the competition, it would lead to continued orders. The schedule is tight, only 1 week until the competition. On top of that, that company will also participate. That company, the company that gave us the opportunity to start our S&T design. She also invited me over, saying she'd gotten interesting news. The designs I had rejected were sold to another design firm by our contract colleague, John. In his eagerness to be promoted, he tried to sabotage me to reduce competition. The company that bought the design from John also had other stolen designs and was reported by the client, and thus John's actions came to light. John was fired just a few months after becoming a full-time employee, and another contract employee again became full-time. For the next week, I worked day and night on the design for the competition. The night before the competition, I finally finished the design drawing. I was so relieved that I fell asleep with my head on my desk. "Hey, you'll catch a cold like that." She had been resting in her bedroom and came to check on the workspace, where the lights were still on. Though I fell asleep, the design is ready. "It's right here," she said. "I know," and put her arm under mine to help me stand. "I'm fine sleeping back. Come here, my bed's warmer." We won the competition, and the company grew. We established a new office and hired about 5 employees. As for me, I'm still living in her house, not just as a work partner, but as a life partner.
The sound of shattering glass jolted me from my daydream. I rushed to the kitchen, my heart pounding, only to find Lucas standing amidst a sea of broken shards, his face contorted with anger. "Damn it, Farah. Can't you buy decent glasses for once?" he snarled, his eyes blazing with contempt. I bit my lip, fighting back the urge to remind him that those were the expensive crystal glasses his mother had given us for our wedding. Instead, I grabbed the broom and dustpan, my hands trembling slightly as I began to sweep up the mess. "I'm sorry, honey. I'll order new ones tomorrow," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lucas scoffed, stepping over the glass fragments as if they were beneath his notice. "Don't bother. I'll take care of it myself. God knows you can't be trusted with anything important." His words stung, but I swallowed the hurt. This wasn't the man I'd married 10 years ago. Something had changed, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. As I finished cleaning up, I heard the front door open and close. Sophia, our 8-year-old daughter, burst into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Mommy, Daddy, I got an A on my science project," she exclaimed, her face beaming with pride. I forced a smile, pushing aside my troubled thoughts. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Lucas barely glanced up from his phone. "That's nice, Princess. Now go wash up for dinner." Sophia's smile faltered for a moment, but she nodded and scampered off to the bathroom. I watched her go, a familiar ache settling in my chest. When had Lucas become so dismissive of our daughter's achievements? As I started preparing dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Olivia. "How are things, dear? Still coming over this weekend to help with the bakery inventory?" I smiled, grateful for the distraction. The family bakery had been our pride and joy for generations, and even though Lucas sneered at it, I couldn't imagine my life without it. "Of course, Mom. Wouldn't miss it for the world," I typed back. Just then, Lucas strode into the kitchen, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. "I'm heading out. Don't wait up." I frowned, setting down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. "But it's Tuesday. We always have family dinner on Tuesdays." He rolled his eyes, already halfway out the door. "Some of us have real jobs, Farah. I can't waste time playing house." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me standing alone in the suddenly too quiet kitchen. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't the first time Lucas had blown off our family commitments, but something about tonight felt different. As I resumed cooking, my mind wandered to the past few months. Lucas's late nights at the office? The hushed phone calls, the way he always seemed to smell of unfamiliar perfume. A nagging suspicion had been growing in the back of my mind, but I'd been too afraid to confront it. Later that night, after tucking Sophia into bed, I found myself drawn to Lucas's home office. I knew I shouldn't snoop, but the need for answers overwhelmed my better judgment. As I rifled through his desk drawers, my hand brushed against something smooth and glossy. With trembling fingers, I pulled out a stack of photographs. My breath caught in my throat as I flipped through them, each image a dagger to my heart. There was Lucas, arm in arm with a stunning blonde woman, laughing and kissing in various romantic settings. The last photo slipped from my numb fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. As I bent to pick it up, I noticed something scrawled on the back in unfamiliar handwriting. To my darling Elle, can't wait for our next adventure. All my love, Cassandra. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as the truth I'd been avoiding for months finally crashed down around me. My husband, the father of my child, was having an affair. The morning after my devastating discovery, I stumbled through our usual routine in a daze. As I poured cereal for Sophia, Lucas sauntered into the kitchen, looking infuriatingly composed. "Daddy, can you come to my dance recital next week?" Sophia asked, her eyes bright with hope. Lucas barely glanced up from his phone. "Sorry, Princess, Daddy's got an important business trip." I couldn't hold my tongue any longer. "Really, Lucas? Another business trip with Cassandra?" His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "You heard me," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know about the affair." Lucas's face contorted with rage. "You've been snooping through my things? Mommy? Daddy? What's going on?" Sophia's small voice quivered. I forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetie. Finish your breakfast and get ready for school." As soon as Sophia left for the bus, Lucas unleashed his fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Digging through my private stuff like some desperate housewife." "I'm not the one cheating, Lucas," I shot back. He sneered. "Maybe if you weren't so caught up in that pathetic little bakery of yours, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere for companionship." His words cut deep, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. "That pathetic little bakery has been in my family for generations. It's part of who I am." "Well, maybe it's time you grew up and got a real job," he spat, "instead of playing with flour and sugar all day like a child." I felt my anger rising. "That bakery puts food on our table and clothes on Sophia's back. How dare you belittle it?" Lucas laughed coldly. "Please, my salary is what keeps this family afloat. Your little hobby barely covers the cost of ingredients." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've got to go. Some of us have actual work to do." As he stormed out, I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. How had we come to this? Later that afternoon, I threw myself into work at the bakery, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of kneading dough and decorating cakes. My mother, Olivia, noticed my distraction. "Farah, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her forehead creased with concern. I hesitated, then spilled everything. The affair, Lucas's cruel words, my fears for the future. Olivia listened, her face growing stormy. "That no-good son of a," she began, then caught herself. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You don't deserve any of this." I wiped away a stray tear. "I just don't know what to do, Mom. For Sophia's sake, I want to make it work, but nothing," Olivia interrupted firmly. "You can't let him treat you this way. You're stronger than that." Just then, the bell above the door chimed. Sophia burst in, followed by Lucas, who wore an expression of exaggerated patience. "Mommy, Daddy's taking me for ice cream," Sophia exclaimed. I raised an eyebrow at Lucas. "Oh, I thought you had actual work to do." He shrugged, a smug smile on his face. "I made time for my little girl, unlike some people who are always stuck in this dump." Olivia bristled beside me, but I placed a calming hand on her arm. "Have fun, sweetie," I said to Sophia, ignoring Lucas's barb. As they left, I caught Lucas whispering to Sophia, "See, Princess, this is why Daddy has to work so hard, so you don't end up stuck in a place like this." My heart clenched as I watched Sophia's brow furrow in confusion. Lucas was trying to turn our daughter against me and the family business. "Oh, Farah," Olivia sighed, pulling me into a hug. "You can't let this go on, for your sake and Sophia's." I nodded, a newfound determination rising within me. "You're right, Mom. It's time I stood up for myself and our family legacy. As I said the words, I felt a shift inside me. The pain and shock were still there, but now they were fuel for a growing fire. Lucas might think he had the upper hand, but he was about to learn that he'd underestimated me and the strength of the Reynolds women. The next morning, I woke up determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I walked into the kitchen, I found Lucas hunched over his laptop, muttering angrily to himself. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He glared at me. "Not that you'd care, but I'm having issues at work. Not that you'd understand, given your occupation." I bit back a retort, focusing instead on making Sophia's lunch. As I spread peanut butter on bread, I noticed Lucas watching me with an odd expression. "What?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious. He shook his head. "Nothing, just wondering how you can be content with this." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "Don't you want more from life?" His words stung, but I refused to let it show. "I have everything I need right here, Lucas. My family, our daughter, the bakery." "That damn bakery again," he interrupted, slamming his laptop shut. "When are you going to realize it's holding you back, holding us all back?" Before I could respond, Sophia bounded into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing. "Morning, Mommy." "Morning, Daddy." Lucas's demeanor changed instantly, his face softening as he turned to our daughter. "Morning, Princess. Ready for school?" As Sophia chattered about her upcoming day, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between Lucas's treatment of her and his attitude towards me. It was as if he was two different people. After dropping Sophia off at school, I headed to the bakery, my mind whirling with conflicting emotions. As I walked in, the familiar scent of freshly baked bread enveloped me, instantly calming my nerves. "Morning, Farah," called Mason, our delivery driver and longtime family friend. "Got a big order coming in today for the Children's Hospital fundraiser." I smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Thanks, Mason. I'll get started on it right away." As I lost myself in the rhythm of measuring, mixing, and kneading, I found my thoughts drifting back to Lucas. Despite his cruel words and actions, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was troubling him. Hours later, as I was putting the finishing touches on a batch of cupcakes, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Working late. Don't wait up." I sighed, unsurprised but still disappointed. As I showed Mason where to load the boxes for delivery, an idea struck me. "Hey, Mason," I called out. "You've known Lucas for a while, right? Have you noticed anything different about him lately?" Mason hesitated, his usually cheerful face clouding over. "Well, now that you mention it, I did see him at that new fancy bar downtown last week. He seemed pretty worked up about something." My heart sank. Was he alone? Mason's uncomfortable silence was answer enough. I thanked him and retreated to the back office, fighting back tears. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by invoices and order forms, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I saw Lucas's behavior for what it truly was. Not just cruelty or dissatisfaction, but a deep-seated insecurity. I thought back to our early days together, how proud he'd been of my family's bakery, how he'd boasted to his friends about marrying into a sweet family. When had that pride turned to resentment? A memory surfaced. Lucas's father, a stern businessman, sneering at our wedding cake. "Cute," he'd said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But when are you going to get a real job, son?" Suddenly, Lucas's recent behavior began to make a twisted kind of sense. His father's disapproval, the pressure to climb the corporate ladder, the constant comparisons to his more successful colleagues, it all added up to a man desperately trying to prove his worth. As this realization dawned on me, I felt a mix of emotions: anger at his treatment of me, pity for his insecurities, and a newfound determination to stand my ground. Just then, my phone buzzed again. It was Lucas. "We need to talk. Meet me at the house in an hour." My heart raced as I read the message. Something in his tone felt different, urgent. As I locked up the bakery and headed home, I steeled myself for whatever was coming. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let Lucas's insecurities destroy everything I held dear. It was time to fight for my family, my business, and myself. I arrived home, my heart pounding with anticipation. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside. "Lucas?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. "In here," came his gruff reply from his home office. I found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers. He barely looked up as I entered. "What's going on, Lucas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed heavily, finally meeting my gaze. "I've been passed over for the promotion at work, again." For a moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy. Then I remembered his recent behavior and steeled myself. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but that doesn't explain why you've been treating me and the bakery with such contempt lately." Lucas's face darkened. "That's just it, Farah. Don't you see? While I'm busting my ass trying to climb the corporate ladder, you're content to play around in that quaint little bakery of yours. It's embarrassing." His words hit me like a slap in the face. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mason. "Farah, we need to talk. It's about Lucas. Can you meet me at the bakery ASAP?" I glanced at Lucas, who had returned to his papers, dismissing me entirely. "I have to go," I said. "We'll finish this conversation later." He waved me off without a word. 20 minutes later, I rushed into the bakery, finding Mason pacing nervously by the counter. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach knotting with dread. Mason's face was grim as he handed me a folder. "I overheard something at the bar last night. Lucas was there, bragging to some guys about how he was going to take care of the bakery broccoli problem once and for all." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were copies of emails, all from Lucas's work account, detailing a plan to sabotage our upcoming contract with Sweethearts Children's Hospital, our biggest client to date. "He's been spreading rumors about food safety violations," Mason explained, his voice tight with anger. "He's trying to get the hospital to cancel their order and blacklist us." I sank into a nearby chair, my mind reeling. "But why? Why would he do this?" Mason's expression softened. "From what I gathered, if he succeeds in tanking your business, he'll get that promotion he's been after. Something about proving his business acumen by eliminating local competition." Tears stung my eyes as the full weight of Lucas's betrayal hit me. Not only was he cheating on me, but he was actively trying to destroy my family's legacy, all for a promotion. Just then, my mother burst through the door, her face flushed with worry. "Farah, honey, I just heard from Mrs. Tompkins at the hospital. They're considering canceling our contract due to some rumors about—" She stopped short when she saw my face. "Oh, sweetheart? You know, don't you?" I nodded, unable to speak through the lump in my throat. Olivia wrapped her arms around me, holding me close as I finally let the tears fall. After a few moments, I pulled away, wiping my eyes. "What are we going to do, Mom? If we lose this contract, the bakery might not survive." Olivia's eyes flashed with determination. "We're going to fight, that's what. No son-in-law of mine is going to destroy what this family has built over generations." Mason nodded in agreement. "I'm with you, Farah. We'll gather evidence that'll clear our name with the hospital and expose Lucas for the snake he is." As I looked between my mother and Mason, I felt a surge of gratitude for their unwavering support. But beneath that, a fierce anger began to burn. Lucas had underestimated me, thinking I'd roll over and let him destroy everything I loved. Well, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. "Okay," I said, standing up straight and squaring my shoulders. "Let's do this. It's time to show Lucas that he messed with the wrong family." As we began to formulate our plan, I realized that this wasn't just about saving the bakery anymore. It was about standing up for myself, my family, and everything we believed in. Lucas had started this war, but I was damn well going to finish it. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. As I walked into the bakery, Olivia was already there, poring over documents spread across the counter. "Morning, honey," she said, looking up. "I've been thinking about our situation with Lucas. We need a plan." I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I know, Mom, but where do we even start?" Just then, Mason burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. "I think I've got something," he said, waving a stack of papers. "Remember those emails I showed you? Well, I did some digging, and it turns out Lucas has been using company resources to orchestrate this whole scheme." My heart raced as I scanned the documents Mason had brought. There, in black and white, was evidence of Lucas's betrayal, not just of me and our family, but of his own company. "This is it," I breathed. "This is how we stop him." Olivia's eyes gleamed with determination. "We need to act fast. If we can prove Lucas has been misusing company resources, we might be able to discredit him before he can do any more damage to the bakery." As we huddled together, formulating our plan, the bakery phone rang. I answered it, my stomach dropping as I recognized the voice on the other end. Mrs. Reynolds? This is Dr. Simmons from Sweethearts Children's Hospital. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your bakery. I swallowed hard, fighting to keep my voice steady. Of course, Dr. Simmons, what seems to be the problem? As she detailed the false allegations Lucas had spread, I felt a mix of anger and desperation rising within me. This contract was everything to us. Losing it could mean the end of the bakery. After assuring Dr. Simmons that we would address her concerns immediately, I hung up and turned to face my mother and Mason. We're running out of time, I said, my voice shaking. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. Olivia squeezed my hand. Then we act now. Mason, can you get those documents to Lucas's company? Mason nodded. I've got a contact in their HR department. I'll make sure they see this today. As Mason left on his mission, Olivia turned to me, her eyes serious. Farah, honey, there's something else we need to discuss. Sophia? My heart clenched at the mention of my daughter's name. In all the chaos, I'd almost forgotten how this would affect her. What about her? I asked, dreading the answer. Olivia sighed. If we go through with this, if we expose Lucas, it's going to change everything. Are you prepared for what that might mean for Sophia? The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I sank into a nearby chair, my mind reeling. On one hand, exposing Lucas's deceit could save our family business and protect us from further harm. On the other, it would undoubtedly shatter Sophia's world. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Picking up Sophia from school, taking her for ice cream to celebrate my big news. Don't wait up. My blood boiled as I read his message. Even now, he was using our daughter as a pawn in his game. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my resolve hardening. We're doing this, I said, my voice firm. For Sophia, for the bakery, for everything our family has built. Lucas doesn't get to destroy all of that just because he's insecure about his own failures. Olivia nodded, a proud smile on her face. That's my girl, so what's our next move? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We gather every piece of evidence we have, emails, financial records, witness statements, everything. Then, we present it all to Lucas's company and the hospital. We show them who he really is and what he's been doing. As I spoke, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever happened next would change our lives forever. And Sophia? Olivia asked gently. I closed my eyes for a moment, my heart aching for my little girl. We'll protect her as best we can, but she deserves to grow up seeing what real strength and integrity look like. And that starts with us standing up to Lucas. With our course set, we threw ourselves into action. As I gathered documents and made calls, I couldn't help but think about Lucas, wondering if he had any idea of the storm that was about to hit him. One thing was certain. He was about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. The next morning dawned with an air of anticipation. I arrived at the bakery early, my nerves on edge as I waited for news from Mason. Olivia was already there, her face etched with worry. Any word yet? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. Nothing, but Mason said he'd call as soon as he heard anything. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Mason. It's done, he said, his voice tight with excitement. Lucas's company has the evidence. They're calling him in for a meeting right now. My heart raced as I relayed the news to Olivia. This was it, the moment of truth. Hours ticked by agonizingly slowly as we waited for more information. I threw myself into work, desperately trying to distract myself from the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Just after lunch, the bakery door flew open. Lucas stormed in, his face contorted with rage. You! He snarled, pointing an accusing finger at me. You did this. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze steadily. Did what, Lucas? Tell the truth? He lunged forward, slamming his fists on the counter. They demoted me, took away my bonus, my office, everything, and it's all your fault. Olivia stepped between us, her voice cold. I think you'll find it's your own fault, Lucas. You made your choices. Lucas's eyes darted between us, realization dawning on his face. You knew about everything. We know about the affair, Lucas, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, and about your plan to sabotage our business. It's over. For a moment, Lucas seemed to deflate. Then his face hardened. You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll make sure you lose everything, the bakery, Sophia, all of it. As he stormed out, the bell above the door jangling violently, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread wash over me. Olivia squeezed my hand. You did it, honey. You stood up to him. But our moment of victory was short-lived. My phone rang. It was Dr. Simmons from the hospital. Mrs. Reynolds, she said, her voice grave. We've received some concerning information about your bakery. I'm afraid we'll have to cancel our contract immediately. My world seemed to tilt on its axis. But we addressed all your concerns. We proved those allegations were false. I'm sorry, Dr. Simmons replied, but we can't risk any negative publicity. It's out of my hands. As I hung up, tears stinging my eyes, Mason burst through the door. Farah, you need to see this. He held up his phone, showing me a local news website. There, in bold letters, was the headline, Local Bakery Embroiled in Food Safety Scandal. It's everywhere, Mason said, his voice tight. Social media, news sites, Lucas must have had this ready to go as a backup plan. I sank into a chair, my head spinning. We'd exposed Lucas's deceit, but at what cost? Our reputation was in tatters, our biggest contract lost. How could we possibly recover from this? As if things couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophia's school. Mrs. Reynolds, please come immediately. There's been an incident involving your daughter. Panic gripped me as I grabbed my keys. What had Lucas done now? Olivia caught my arm as I rushed past. Farah, wait. Whatever happens, remember, you're stronger than you know. We'll get through this together. I nodded, trying to draw strength from her words. As I drove to Sophia's school, my mind raced. Lucas had thrown everything he had at us, and for a moment it seemed like he might win. But as I pulled into the school parking lot, a newfound determination welled up inside me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Sophia, about our family legacy, about standing up to bullies like Lucas. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. Lucas might think he'd won this round, but I was far from defeated. The real fight was just beginning. And I was ready for it. I burst through the school doors, my heart pounding. The principal's secretary ushered me into the office, where I found Sophia sitting quietly, her eyes red and puffy. Mrs. Reynolds, the principal began, her face grave. There's been an incident. Sophia got into an altercation with another student. I knelt beside my daughter, gently taking her hand. Sweetie, what happened? Sophia's lip quivered. Tommy said our bakery makes people sick. He said Daddy told his dad so. I pushed him. My blood ran cold. Lucas had stooped so low as to use our daughter in his vendetta against me. I'm so sorry, I said to the principal. We're going through a difficult time at home. It won't happen again. As we left the school, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from worried customers and friends. The damage Lucas had done was spreading like wildfire. Back at the bakery, Olivia and Mason were fielding a barrage of calls and social media messages. The atmosphere was tense, bordering on panic. Farah, Mason said, his voice strained. We're losing customers by the minute. If this keeps up... I nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. Our bakery, our legacy, was on the brink of collapse. Just then, the bell above the door chimed. Lucas sauntered in, a smug smile on his face. Well, well, he drawled. Quite the busy day you're having. Rage boiled inside me. How dare you, I hissed. How dare you use our daughter in your sick game? Lucas's smile faltered for a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Cut the act, Lucas, I snapped. I know everything. The affair, the sabotage, all of it. And now this. Turning our community against us? Using Sophia? For a moment, Lucas looked taken aback. Then his face hardened. You brought this on yourself, Farah. If you'd just given up this pathetic little bakery like I asked. Enough, I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my voice. I've had enough of your lies, your manipulation, your cruelty. I stormed to the back office, yanking open a drawer. When I returned, I slapped a thick envelope on the counter between us. What's this? Lucas asked, eyeing it warily. Divorce papers, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I want you out of our lives, Lucas, for good. Lucas's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. You can't do this to me, he snarled. Suddenly, Mason was there, pulling Lucas away. That's enough, man. It's over. As Mason escorted a fuming Lucas out, I turned to find Sophia standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Mom? She whispered. Are you and Daddy getting divorced? My heart shattered. This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment where I had to shatter my daughter's world to save our future. I knelt down, pulling her into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. Sometimes grown-ups can't stay together, even if they both love their children very much." As Sophia sobbed in my arms, I looked up to see Olivia and Mason watching us, their faces a mix of sympathy and determination. "What do we do now?" Mason asked quietly. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "We fight back. We tell our side of the story. We show this community who we really are." Olivia nodded, a fierce pride in her eyes. "That's my girl. We're Reynolds women. We don't give up." As I held my daughter close, comforting her through her tears, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles, rebuilding our reputation, and helping Sophia navigate this new reality. But for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from Lucas's manipulation, free from the constant fear and doubt. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to face it. I looked around at my family, not just Sophia and Olivia, but Mason too, who had stood by us through everything. This was what mattered. This was worth fighting for. "All right," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Let's get to work. We have a bakery to save and a future to build." As we began to plan our next moves, I realized that this wasn't just about saving the bakery anymore. It was about reclaiming our lives, our dignity, and our right to happiness. Lucas had tried to break us, but he'd only made us stronger. The real battle was just beginning, and I was ready for it. 6 months after I handed Lucas those divorce papers, I stood in the newly expanded Reynolds family bakery, marveling at how much had changed. The aroma of fresh bread and sweet pastries filled the air, a comforting reminder of our resilience. The bell above the door chimed, and I turned to see Dr. Simmons from Sweethearts Children's Hospital walk in, a warm smile on her face. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "Or should I say, Miss Reynolds now?" I shook her hand, returning the smile. "Farah, please. It's good to see you, Dr. Simmons." She looked around approvingly. "I must say I'm impressed. After everything that happened, to see you not just recover, but thrive, it's remarkable." I felt a surge of pride. The past months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, community outreach, and tireless work to rebuild our reputation. But we'd done it. We'd not only salvaged our business, but expanded it. "We couldn't have done it without the community's support," I said. "And yours." Renewing our contract meant everything to us. Dr. Simmons nodded. "Well, when the truth came out about your ex-husband's deception, it was the least we could do. Those children love your treats too much for us to let a few lies get in the way." As if on cue, Sophia burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Grandma, guess what? I got the lead in the school play." I scooped her up in a hug, my heart swelling with love and pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." As I set her down, I caught sight of Lucas's parents entering the bakery. Despite everything that had happened with Lucas, they had remained a constant, loving presence in Sophia's life. I was grateful for that, for Sophia's sake. "Go say hi to Nana and Papa," I told Sophia, watching as she ran to embrace them. Olivia appeared at my side, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Look at her," she said softly. "She's flourishing, Farah. You both are." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. The journey hadn't been easy, but seeing Sophia happy and thriving made it all worth it. Just then Mason walked in, a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Have you seen this?" he asked, handing it to me. The headline read, "Local man arrested for corporate espionage and fraud." Below was a photo of Lucas being led away in handcuffs. I skimmed the article, my hands shaking slightly. Lucas's attempts to sabotage our business had led to a wider investigation, uncovering years of fraudulent activities at his company. He was facing serious jail time. "Are you okay?" Mason asked, his voice laced with concern. I took a deep breath, surprised to find that I felt relieved. "I am," I said, realizing it was true. "It's over, really over." As I looked around the bakery, at Sophia laughing with her grandparents, at Olivia chatting with regular customers, at Mason's supportive presence beside me, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. This was my family. This was my legacy. And I had fought tooth and nail to protect it. "You know," I said to Mason, "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness, never asking for help. But now I realize true strength is in vulnerability, in leaning on others when you need to, and in standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Mason squeezed my shoulder. You're the strongest person I know, Farah. As the day wound down and we closed up shop, I found myself alone in the bakery. I ran my hand along the smooth countertop, thinking of all the generations of Reynolds women who had stood in this very spot. I thought of the challenges we'd faced, the battles we'd won, and the bright future ahead of us. I thought of Sophia and the example I hoped I was setting for her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely at peace. Whatever life threw at us next, I knew we could handle it. Because we were Reynolds women. And Reynolds women don't break. We rise. With a smile on my face and hope in my heart, I turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool evening air, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring.
I'm ignoring your existence from today. The message that was affixed to the front door stated that. This seemed like yet another setback from my wife and daughter after a string of demanding shifts. They behave as though I'm non-existent. Until I saw my wife and daughter's true intents, I continued to think that we could go back to the good old days when we got along well. I turned off the house's water and electricity as a first move in my revenge. My wife confronted me out of rage. I'm Tim, and I'm 55 years old. I own a small advertising agency in a conventional New York neighborhood. We employ 11 people total, including temporary and part-time workers. People in their 20s to 60s work at this family-run business, which is undoubtedly more comfortable than my house. I remarried Kathy 5 years ago. She was 15 years my junior. I accepted Mary, Kathy's daughter, who was in the 5th grade at the time, into our home as my stepdaughter. Mary, while being a stepchild, became my first kid as I had no children from my first marriage. I was originally concerned about her acceptance of me as her father, but she called me Dad and loved me right away. Regardless of how busy I was, I would leave work to race to Mary's track matches and set up my camera to record her courageous moments, since I thought of Mary as my own daughter. This year, Mary is starting high school, which should be an exciting time. Sadly, in our 5 years of marriage, our family relationship has entirely cooled down. I understand why. I was frequently absent from home due to my constant work-related distractions. In my first marriage, it was the same. I was employed by a large corporation as a corporate employee back then, when I was much younger, in my 30s. I used to frequently entertain clients or go out for drinks with supervisors and coworkers after work. I would usually return home in the wee hours of the morning. My wife eventually left one day, taking a divorce note with her. My first wife and I got divorced years ago, and I never believed I would get married again. However, that is how my current wife, Kathy, entered my life. I meant to value this friendship even more than before, but I haven't been able to go home at all in recent weeks due to work-related stress. No, it's only a 30-minute trip from my house to the office, so I could have made it home if I had really tried. However, I persisted in spending the night at the office since I felt uncomfortable around my family. When I did go home, Kathy would actually just say, "Oh, you're back," without even fixing dinner, and we seldom talked about anything other than what was absolutely essential. Nonetheless, I made a concerted effort to communicate with my family. I'm sorry for always coming back at odd hours. Hey, I might be able to get the next weekend off for a long weekend. How about we take a family trip to a hot spring, just the 3 of us? But all Kathy could muster was a strained smile in return. You don't need to come. Mary and I will go as usual. Besides, young kids aren't interested in hot springs these days. Is that so? I was at a loss for words. Mary's attitude was even worse than Kathy's, who was colder than hell. When we did occasionally get together at the house, she would just give me a frustrated look in return, even when I smiled. It resembled how someone might respond if they saw an unfamiliar stranger attempting to strike up a conversation on the street. Don't look so upset. Seeing you smile would blow all the fatigue from my work away. What? That's super creepy. I'm not just upset. I genuinely dislike you. Go away. Shaken by her remarks, I looked to Kathy for guidance. Mary recently told me she hates me. She used to call me Dad when she was in elementary school, but now she won't even talk to me, I said. That's just the way it is, isn't it? All girls her age are like that, Kathy replied, frowning. I vowed not to quit up on this family bond, even if it was the chilly answer I anticipated. I guess so. If she kept calling me Dad, she might never get a boyfriend. By the way, does Mary have a boyfriend? She's beautiful like you, so she must be popular. I chuckled. My attempt at comedy, however, backfired, and Kathy looked irritated, saying, Mary has her own life, so she's naturally wary since you're not her real father. And that sort of prying was plain weird. Wary? She means she doesn't trust you. And please don't call Mary sweet or anything like that. It could be taken the wrong way. Kathy's scathing remarks sent me to my knees. How can I earn back my family's trust? I genuinely questioned. I believed that before it was too late, I needed to spend more time and interact with my family in a meaningful way. I've considered retiring when I turn 60 and giving my company to a friend. After that, I want to take Kathy and Mary on an opulent global cruise. Of course, this is meant to be a treat for Mary if she is accepted into college, but I still want to take her, to demonstrate to her that pleasure in life is about more than simply getting into a prestigious university and earning a job at a prestigious firm. I had once told Kathy that I was considering leaving the company. She displayed her rage. What are you talking about? If you give up the company, how will we live? Do you know how much more money it will take? Yes, I am aware of this, but we should have enough savings to pay for Mary's entire school, and since I won't be leaving entirely, everything should be all right. I told her, I won't let you guys suffer, and I managed to save Kathy. She said, yes, the account I gave you when we got married, all of a sudden. It was intended to be used for our future. That was a long time ago. I'm done with it, she said. It was as if someone had taken a hammer to my brain. Used up. Then, what about Mary's future? You just need to keep working hard until you drop, Kathy replied with a sly smile. The best thing you can do for your family is that. Don't worry about anything else. Simply work to fulfill our needs. That's your purpose, she replied, her smile giving me a shiver. I wanted to think I was different, but after hearing Kathy say that there are many guys in this world who are fathers only in name, whose reality is merely to earn money, I had to confront the fact that I wasn't what she wanted in the first place. I was just a source of revenue. When I got home one night from yet another long workday, I saw this note on the front door. Asterisk starting today, I'm disregarding your existence asterisk. I took my time, peeling the paper off the door and tucked it into my shoe. When I finally got inside, as I had promised, neither my wife nor my daughter acknowledged me. It was as though I had vanished from sight. Since no food had been prepared, I spread out on the dining table a quick meal I had picked up at the convenience store and began to eat. I opened the refrigerator, needing a beer badly, and there was not a single one left. Not only that, but all the snacks and dried foods I had purchased to go with the beer were thrown out, as if they had really made up their minds to ignore me. But the time came when that resolution was broken. I still wanted to live happily with my family the way we used to. I still had happy memories in my heart. I was resolved to honestly engage with my family no matter what. The reply was another note. Asterisk, do not come to the entrance ceremony. If you do, I will hate you forever. Asterisk, Mary was starting high school, and I had promised to take the day off work to attend. Peeling off the paper, I wondered how it had come to this. No matter how hard I tried, I could never come up with an explanation. Desperate to see Mary on her special day, I followed them in secret, only to find out a startling truth. Following the ceremony at the entry, Kathy and Mary went into a cafe, and I stepped in after them, lurking behind them as I listened to their jovial banter. Has he recently shown you any creepiness, Mom? I'm genuinely concerned for you. Well, occasionally I do sense his eerie gazes, but it appears that the ignore tactic is working. He no longer communicated with us. That's excellent. Mary, I apologize for forcing you to refer to someone else as Dad. He was, however, a very giving man. That's why I felt grateful. But that was his true purpose in life. My only goal was to save our future. I was so shocked to learn the truth that I was unable to move from that location even after they had departed. There was nothing to be gained. Everything had been a lie from the beginning. The wrath was so powerful that I was unable to control it. It was spring, a busy time for moving, and I never thought I would be this stressed out over not being loved. I went straight to the real estate agency and proceeded to cancel the lease on my apartment, which was close to the station, spacious, and well lit, so the agent was surprised by the sudden cancellation, but I knew it would find a new tenant quickly. I also called to have the utilities, like water and electricity, disconnected. I stayed at work instead of going home, and the following day Kathy and Mary arrived at my office clearly agitated. The water and power are off. What is happening? Tell me not to worry. You have been paying your expenses. Have you never settled any bills on your own? I deliberately did that. You two must vacate the apartment before the end of this month, since I've also canceled the lease. I spoke abruptly and without emotion. And we're getting a divorce. Kathy's face reddened with rage after hearing this. Divorce? What topic are you discussing? That kind of stuff can't just be said out of the blue and expected to happen. It's not a sudden development. You married me merely to live comfortably. Isn't that right? She called me Dad, and you two laughed at me behind my back. What are you saying? What's the matter with you? You're not like the other people. I laughed a bit when Kathy said, Wasn't it you who always labeled me creepy? You will no longer have to coexist with a strange man. I hope the two of you have a great life together. The money I gave you when we got married is still with you, right? In addition to the monthly salary I have been providing you, you own all of the savings. But as I just mentioned, I'm almost done with that. Even now, what are you even saying? You ought to feel thankful that you have a family at all. It is only required of you to support that family. I won't end our marriage. I was conflicted by her refusal to get a divorce until I saw Mary was standing outside, glaring at me and shaking, and she was watching us dispute. Anyway, turn on the water and electricity again right now. We have 2 weeks left before the end of the month, even with our move. We're not even able to live right. You are able to give them a call. Get rid of my belongings. Are you not accustomed to getting rid of my belongings? Seldom do I have something noteworthy. My clothes and necessities are here because I've frequently stayed at the office. Are you going to live in your office's small break room? I have a house I bought during my first marriage, I said, shaking my head. Now, I intend to reside there. My mortgage still has to be paid off. I purchased a mansion with great excitement for the family. That mortgage payment could take a lifetime to pay off. A home. Now that I think about it, Kathy's face when we first met, at a club in downtown New York, was exactly the same. Her eyes sparked instantly. Her eyes brightened when she saw that I was a CEO. Kathy was in her late 30s at the time, and she must have been the most desperate of the younger ladies there, having a child too, thinking that things would be difficult and viewing me as an easy target. A reference? What topic are you discussing? I've never heard anything like that. You haven't heard because I never brought it up, of course. But it would be pointless to try to accept it. Since we bought it before we got married, it isn't regarded as joint property. Go ahead and seek alimony if you so choose. I'll fight you and get a lawyer. I truly don't want to go through a divorce trial, but because I now know that the family with Kathy was a deception from the beginning, I have no other choice than to accept this truth. What an unpleasant thing it is for a married couple to argue like this. I will undoubtedly make an alimony claim. It's just too cruel to turn off the water and electricity and force us to go all at once. And I'll see to it that you provide Mary child support." Kathy spit out her words, dragging Mary along as they drove out. I was prepared for a protracted battle because of her strong pride, but a few days later, she sent over the divorce papers without warning, and the divorce was completed amicably. I'll consent to a divorce if that's what you desire. I refuse to request child support or alimony. I'll get rid of everything in the house. Okay then, goodbye. That was the last time I heard from her. She's probably moved on to live with a new man. If it were just a matter of moving, getting rid of everything in the house would be strange. She's probably starting a new life somewhere with a new man. But that doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't care about what happens to Kathy or whoever she's with. I went back to the mansion in downtown New York, feeling depressed for the first time in a long time. How many years had passed since I'd last been here? The interior was immaculate, and everything about the house was in its original place, ready for immediate move-in. No, time in this house had stopped 10 years ago, the day my first wife, Amy, left with nothing more than a divorce notice and walked out. I have to thank Kathy reluctantly because without her, I never would have returned to this house. I told Kathy that it was a house to live in, but to be honest, I never meant to live here alone. It's unsettling to think of living in a house this size alone, and it makes no sense to keep paying a mortgage on a house that is empty. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to the real estate agent about selling the house. It might not be worth as much as when I bought it, but that is unavoidable, so simply being willing to let it go feels like a step forward. My phone rang then, and it was Amy. I stared at the caller ID, feeling shocked that I would actually see her name again, never dreaming that the day I moved back into the house we shared, she would call. And I answered, almost without thinking. I could hear my voice faltering as I said, "Hello." It had been 10 years since I'd spoken to Amy. "Tim, is that you? A long time has passed. How are you doing?" Her well-known voice made my heart race. "Yes, it has been a while. How are you doing, Amy?" I genuinely loved her, and as I was speaking, memories of our time together came flooding back. When I first met Amy, 2 years after I started working for a big corporation, she was still a college student, and we got together through a mutual friend. Amy was already kind and gorgeous, well-liked by everyone, so it felt miraculous that we were a couple. Her, the sought-after beauty, and me, the plain guy from a big company, especially when she admitted that she liked me first. I was genuinely happy. Following Amy's college graduation, we made a promise to each other when we got married. I bought a mansion that was way out of my price range, and we built a big, roomy house with the idea that we could live there comfortably as we grew older and started a family. We never lost our happiness, though, and we enjoyed each other's company throughout the day. But as I said earlier, work and business obligations caused me to spend more time away from home. Amy was working sick at the time, so she was on sick leave from her job, and I realized that leaving her alone in such a big house and just waiting for me to come home could have been upsetting for her. I didn't really think about Amy's feelings. I just thought it was enough that I could support her financially. And then, after taking only a few personal items with her, Amy vanished. I was shocked, but I was also getting angry at that point because even though she had never caused her financial difficulties, the way she abruptly left the marriage, as if running away, begs the question of how she could take into account the feelings of others. These kinds of thoughts come to me because of my upbringing. When Amy left, I was so distraught that I had to quit my job. It took some time for me to get over it. When we talked about my parents in therapy, the therapist said, "Your father was quite authoritarian towards the family, and you were affected by that." I thought back to when I was a child. My dad worked as an office worker, not very well paid, and he wasted away weekends and nights drinking. Our family never had much money, and my mom had to work 2 jobs to pay for my education. I could never forgive my dad, but I never took it out on him. Instead, I put all of my energy into my studies, outperforming him and landing a job at a big company. My way of getting even was to make sure my mother never had to worry about finances. I succeeded in getting into a prominent institution, but before I could get even, my father unexpectedly died from a horrible illness. Without my goal, I felt as though I had wasted all of my hard work leading up to it. Amy was the one who gave me a new purpose in life. "Your life should be lived for yourself," she informed me. I had a lasting tie to this house since I had also lost Amy, and I had even harbored hopes that she may return. That expectation persisted even when I married Kathy, and although I made every effort to be a good parent to them, I could not help but think about this house. I've been working abroad for the past few years, and this week I returned. I called out of the blue, saying, "I'm sorry to disturb you, knowing you have a family." "No, not at this time. I have a divorce." "Once more, I've lost everything," she answered. Then there was a gasp on the other end of the line, and Amy's voice became strained, and she burst into tears. "Amy, what's wrong? Are things going well for you?" Surprised, I questioned, expressing concern for her right away. "I apologize. That's when I got afraid." "I was really scared," the woman remarked. "Afraid? What frightened you? Did you get nervous because I wasn't coming home?" I sincerely apologized for it. I didn't know what was most important because I was young. No, that wasn't the reason. To be honest, I suffered from daily anxiety due to our inability to become parents. I felt inadequate to the magnificent home you had created. I felt a great deal of remorse. We'd never really talked about having kids. I simply assumed it would happen when it happened. I had no idea she'd been feeling so burdened. "I didn't know you had those feelings. For me, it was sufficient to simply be able to live with you," I remarked. "I had the same emotions. I've lamented our split forever. Would you wish to try living with me again? After all the drama with Kathy and her family, I was scared I would be hurt again. But I also didn't want to look back and regret anything," I questioned, mustering up the confidence. She answered, "Give me some time to think." "Obviously. Take as much time as you require," I answered. "I don't want to ever make you regret anything." In any case, I hadn't seen the end of my battle yet, and a few days later, I received the call that was to come. "I've made up my mind. I will make an alimony claim. Our lives are a disaster as a result of your actions." Since I was the one who had experienced the worst, I questioned how she could have spoken such a thing. "Why the hurry? Guess what? Your new man ran away, didn't he? Are you going to try to con me out of even more money now?" Kathy was obviously in a panic. "A new man? What topic are you discussing? It won't help to pretend you don't know." "I apologize, but I had a detective agency look into you. It seems strange that after raising such a fuss over alimony during the divorce, you suddenly decided you didn't want it. I've got proof. Is it still possible to discuss alimony?" Kathy struggled to find words. "Mary exists, but I think I should be the one requesting alimony. I don't want to burden her life, regardless of you. You really need to consider your lifestyle, if only for Mary's sake." Then Kathy gave Mary the phone. "I apologize, Daddy. It wasn't how I intended for it to be. Don't leave Mom behind, please." Sadness welled up beyond my indignation. Were we again going to play such dirty tricks with our daughter? "Listen, Mary, you and Mom have to collaborate honestly going forward. Relying on a man's assistance is not something you should do. It typically ends in sadness." But after I said that, Mary laughed and said, "Huh. Do you believe that I should be treated like a child?" Mom as well. "Really? I detest grown-ups. I'm completely finished. I despise everyone," she yelled. Subsequently, there was a tremendous noise over the phone. She must have thrown it. The call was disconnected, suggesting that the phone shattered. She never called again. This seemed to settle the issue for the time being, But there's still something I haven't told you about. To be honest, I was lying when I said I had hired a detective agency to look into Kathy. I knew she had a new man already because I had arranged for him to be introduced to her. I set up a trap by bringing in an actor, and Kathy fell for it splendidly, getting carried away, and saying she needed neither alimony nor child support. Everything went according to plan. Having tasted wealth, it was unthinkable that she would go back to a regular job. But now, no longer young, I thought she would cling to any man who had money. I mean, she had been lying to me all along, so I suppose it wouldn't be unfair to lie to her in the end. But lying to someone like Kathy didn't make me happy. All I felt was a deep, empty feeling that words couldn't express. Afterwards, I learned that Kathy had nowhere else to go and went back to her parents' house. There, her brother and his wife were taking care of their aging parents, and there was an arrangement that allowed her to stay in exchange for helping to take care of them. Though that arrangement was short-lived. Kathy had never been good with her parents. She had always resented them, and they had never forgiven her for running away from home as if she were trying to escape. Before long, a tragic incident happened while she was living there, and it quickly became the talk of the household. Mary's mother was jailed, and she was placed with other family members. She was young and experienced many obstacles, but maybe it was best that she avoided Kathy's influence. I genuinely hope Mary may begin her life anew in a new home. When the summer was over, Amy came to my mansion. Her request for time to reflect was really about the fact that she had a fifth grader for a kid, which I was unaware of. I was so happy when you said you wanted to live together, but I couldn't bring myself to tell you about my son. What are you discussing, Amy? Now your son is also my son. I really do feel this way. I'll never forget the moment I saw Amy's son briefly peek out from behind her, his concerned expression shifting from Amy's face to mine. This is your dad from today, Kenny. Look at him. Say hello. Amy encouraged you. The bewildered youngster hesitated as his mother prodded him. So I said, You don't have to think of me as your dad right away. Kenny, welcome to our home. With a mental vow to take my time in assisting us in becoming a family, I held out my hand to the boy.